Hey guys, what's up? I'm here with a new series we're gonna be doing, and I'm gonna try to keep all of these videos super short. They're gonna be like 10 minutes each, maybe 15, but I'm gonna be talking about budget modern because most decks in modern are crazy expensive, and so I'm gonna be giving you several decks that are all 75 cards, so the 15 sideboard for less than $100. And I'm gonna leave a little bit of wiggle room for price fluctuation, but I'm gonna start off with a very interesting deck. I'm gonna start off with Modern Merfolk, and as you can see up at the top, prices are gonna be U.S. dollars, and I'm gonna be basing off of tabletop. So you'll probably be able to get it online for a lot cheaper. For example, this deck you can get for like 35 bucks online. Anyway, I really don't want to take too long, and I want to give you a quick rundown of the deck, and hopefully you will enjoy it. So, right here, the main parts of the deck are split up to, there's Lords that will pump all of your Merfolk, there's Removal, and there's ways to interact with your opponent. Now, the Lords, we have Master of the Pearl Triton, giving your Merfolk +1/+1 and Island Walk. Lord of Atlantis doing the same thing, but all Merfolk gain Island Walk and +1/+1. That includes itself as well as your opponent's creatures, so if your opponent's playing Changelings or other Merfolk, they'll also get buffed. But usually it's not that common of a deck, so you'll get that advantage. So next we also have the third Lord, which says other Merfolk creatures you control get +1/+1. Now, it also has whenever you play a Merfolk spell, you may tap or untap target permanent. That's really good for untapping your lands to keep playing things or to tap down your opponent's creatures. Now, that gives us a total of 12 Lords in our deck. And that's going to be a really good card. That's going to be really good because we're going to get a lot of small, cheap creatures on the board. The next thing we're going to keep in mind is the removal real quick. We have Deprive for counter spells. We have Dismember because there's not really good blue option right now. There might be in Kaldheim, but not in Modern right now. And then Spreading Seas, even outside of a budget, by the way. And then Spreading Seas is kind of pseudo removal. It's kind of a mini Blood Moon where you can cut your opponent off of the mana they need, and it also turns something into an island. And in case you don't know why that's so important, is Master of the Pearl Triton and Lord of Atlantis both give Island Walk, which, if you don't know, means that if your opponent has an island, your creatures are unblockable. So, if your opponent is not naturally running blue, you can use Spreading Seas on their lands, to one, cut them off of mana, but two, to also make your guys unblockable. Now, there's a kind of separate category of Silvergill Adept. It's not a Lord, it's not removal, but it's a way to just draw more cards. It replaces itself in your hand. As you cast it, you reveal a Merfolk or you pay 3. Usually doesn't matter. But it's 2/1, and you're able to just replace itself when you cast it. Next up is another way. It's just a way to interact with your opponent. It's Harbinger of the Tides. It's a 2-drop 2/2 that when you cast it, like you can cast it as if it were Flash if you pay an additional 2. But when it enters the battlefield, you may return target tapped creature and opponent controls to its owner's hand. So if you play this while your opponent is attacking, you can bounce one of their creatures and block another. So you're essentially getting 2 for 1. And quite often, it's going to be 2 for 0 because you're going to have so many Lords out that it probably won't even die. Next up is another way. It's our only it's our only real true one drop in the main deck. Mistcaller says sacrifice Mistcaller until end of turn. If a non-token creature would enter the battlefield and wasn't cast, exile it instead. This is amazing against collected company decks and graveyard decks, and for that reason it's in here as a one of. Not as a one of, as our one drop. And the last card that is not a that is not really a lord or way to interact with our opponent. Actually, I guess there are two, but I'm going to mention this one first because it's so important. Merfolk Trickster says flash when it enters the battlefield, tap target creature an opponent controls. It loses all abilities until end of turn, and it enters as a 2/2. And so this is probably one of the biggest cards in the deck. There are lords, there's ways to interact with your opponents, there's removal, whatever. I, as a totally, I have, very little experience with Merfolk, admittedly, because I play everything, okay? I hop around. I'm not the Merfolk player. But this card, you can listen to me when I say this. This card is the card that no matter what deck you're playing, if it runs Trickster, this Trickster, this card is this is the difference between a good and a bad Merfolk player. Someone who, a very skilled Merfolk player will be able to use this card to do a million different things. And someone who's not as experienced might use it during a main phase. Well, there are still circumstances you can do that, but they really might not get the full extent of it. So that's really, I feel like that's the biggest skill cap of the deck. Next up is our last creature of the deck, Master of Waves. Now, real quick, if you look, we have a lot of blue in the mana cost of our permanents, including Spreading Seas. That does count, by the way. But Master of Waves says protection from red, really good against burn. And it also says elemental creatures you control get +1/+1, and when it enters the battlefield, it creates a number of 1/0 blue elementals equal to your devotion to blue. And we have several permanents in our deck that just are blue in their mana cost, or a single blue. And that is part of the reason why we are mono blue. Part of it's to keep a budget, but another part of it is Master of Waves. Master of Waves is one of those cards, kind of like Collected Company, where if you just draw it, it can be like, oh, I win now. And for that reason, it's in here, and it's a very powerful card. It pumps up all your elementals, and if you have multiples of these out, it's insane, but you only really need one. Deprive, it's a counterspell. You can bounce one of your lands to your hand. The land getting bounced to your hand isn't a problem in this deck. We don't have a lot of trouble hitting our land drops. We aren't trying to get 20 lands out. Dismember is I've already gone over it, but it's really the only good option for removal right now in blue. For our lands, we have Castle Vantress. I used to hate this card, but with the number of times where you're just trying to top deck that Spreading Seas, top deck that Master of Waves, top deck that removal spell, top deck the Lord that makes all of your guys do lethal damage, it's worth it. So I run it as a 4 of. Fairy Conclave is in here kind of as a Mutavault, but it also produces blue and it has flying. So this is something in here as just a little bit of extra utility. We have islands. We can't afford to run snow-covered islands because we're on under $100. If you just own them, play them. Tectonic Edge is a way for us to deal with pesky lands like Field of the Dead. And if they land Field of the Dead, we've probably lost, but this is our way to mitigate those losses. That's the main deck. And for our sideboard, we have Mystical Dispute for our matchups against combo decks and just control decks. Deprive as an extra way to get enter the battlefield abilities, but also just give us more counter spells. Repeal to mainly get rid of Ensnaring Bridge. That's our biggest problem here. Grafdigger's Cage against things like Dredge and honestly a lot of other decks like that. Important to note, this card does not stop Trickery, Tibble's Trickery in the new set, so be careful about that. And then next up is Tormod's Crypt, which is a 0-drop, exiles all cards from graveyards. It's just a little way to deal with Lurrus decks and other graveyard decks. But it's just, I didn't think that the Grafdigger's Cages were going to be enough, and they're not like the best, like not best, but they're not like, they don't cover all the bases for graveyard decks. Anyway, that's Modern Merfolk, and I hope you enjoyed watching the video. I went through it fairly quickly, but I cannot do all of these videos and take like 40 minutes. You guys will never watch it. But if you liked it, let me know below. And if you have any comments, also let me know. I really like Merfolk. It's a very aggressive creature tribal deck, and it can be very powerful, especially against burn. Is like, my meta is very burn heavy, and so this deck is very powerful despite being under $100. So I hope that you enjoy this deck, and I will see you next time.